The mirrors aren't meant to burn. Admiral Eva Rostova stood on the command deck of the Terran fleet ship, resolute her form, a study in stillness against the slow chaos of orbital mechanics. Before her, the main bridge viewport was a canvas of cruel beauty displaying the sapphire curve of the colony world. Haven, a jewel clutched in the gauntlet of the Cathar hegemony blockade. Dozens of their ships, obsidian daggers against the starfield, held their positions with unnerving precision. Between them and the planet, trapped like flies in amber, floated the civilian convoy stuffed with refugees, supplies, and hope. A single vessel, the transport Stellaron, was isolated from the rest, held in the crosshairs of the lead Cathar dreadnought. On the tactical display to Rostova's right, a countdown bled crimson numbers downward 0055812. The ultimatum had been as simple as it was monstrous. Haven would surrender its sovereignty accepting the Cathar collar or the Stellaron, and its 17,000 souls would be atomized as a public lesson. The hegemony broadcast the threat on all open channels, their doctrine one of terror and compliance. Rostova's fleet, the 3rd Expeditionary, had arrived 3 days ago, a line of stark white vessels against the void, and they had waited their presence a silent counteroffer to the hegemony's brutal demand. The air on the bridge was tight with the scent of recycled oxygen and the low, resonant hum of the ship's gravitic core. 6 hours, Commander Jian Li stated, his voice a low growl of frustration from the tactical station. They've sat on their hands for 3 days, and now they start a clock. It is a performance of dominance, Admiral. Rostova's eyes remained on the viewport. Everything the hegemony does is a performance, Jian. They rule by fear, and fear requires an audience. They built their empire on the bones of those who watched. Probabilities remain unchanged, the voice of the fleet mind. Solon chimed through the bridge emitters. The sound was calm, synthesized, yet carried an intelligence that felt ancient. A direct kinetic engagement results in a 72% chance of fleet mission failure and unacceptable losses. The Cathar capital ships outmass and outgun us by a factor of 3. Rostova gave a faint nod, her knuckles white where she gripped the command rail. The cool metal was a familiar anchor in the storm of command. We are not here for a kinetic engagement, Solon. We are here to teach. A young ensign sat hunched over her comms panel, her face illuminated by the soft blue glow of the console. She was monitoring the civilian channels, a torrent of panicked pleas and prayers from the convoy. Her own family was down on Haven, a fact she had disclosed only to her direct superior. She traced the outline of the Stellaron on her secondary screen, her breath catching with each descending number of the hegemony's timer. She imagined the families huddled inside, seeing the same clock, feeling the same cold dread creep into their bones. Her job was to listen, to be the witness to their fear, and it felt like the hardest job in the entire fleet. Commander Lee's status of the mirror lattice deployment drones. Rostova commanded, her tone pulling the bridge's attention into a single sharp point. Drones are loaded and standing by in launch tubes 1 through 40. Admiral Lee responded, his fingers dancing across his control surface. Arrays are primed. We can deploy the entire defensive shell in under 4 minutes. We won't be deploying a shell, Rostova corrected gently. We are going to open a door. A mystery was a weapon if you held the key. She turned to her sensor chief, Lieutenant Anya Sharma. Anya, I want you to prepare the Ghost Echoes sequence Delta and have Solon run a full tally bias projection based on the Cathar fleet's current energy expenditure. I want to know exactly how much power they're willing to waste on intimidation. Aye. Admiral Sharma confirmed, her brow furrowed in concentration. The order was unusual, but no one on the Resolute's bridge questioned Rostova's methods. They had seen them work before. The faint vibration of the deck plates shifted, as the drone launch tubes were fully pressurized, a subtle promise of action. The hegemony's voice, a synthesized guttural pronouncement from Overlord Valerius, suddenly boomed across the open channel again. Your time for consideration grows short, humans. Your posturing is meaningless. Haven will submit or the void will have its due. The ledger must be balanced. Rostova allowed a thin, cold smile to touch her lips. He has no idea what a balanced ledger truly looks like. Our ledgers are written in light, not blood. The Cathar, true to their theatrical nature, decided to punctuate their threat. A thin, searing beam of energy, more warning than weapon, lanced out from their lead dreadnought. It struck the Stellaron's forward quarter, not penetrating the hull, but superheating the ablative armor until it glowed a furious, terrifying cherry red. Alarms shrieked across the civilian channels, a wave of pure panic that washed over the bridge comms. The heat shimmer was visible even from the Resolute's distance. Minor structural damage to the transport, Solon reported calmly. No hull breach detected. Casualties are likely minimal, but panic is maximal. A calculated act of psychological warfare. They just signed their own lesson plan, Rostova said, her voice dropping, losing its patient edge for a sliver of something harder. Gian launched the Ghost Echoes. All of them. Anya, I want them screaming with energy. Make them look like our entire fleet just decided to charge head first. Admiral Lee began a hint of protest in his voice. A full-scale charge was suicide. We are not charging, Commander, she cut him off. We are making them flinch. Execute. They will aim at shadows and find themselves wanting. Suddenly the space between the human fleet and the Cathar blockade erupted with phantoms. Dozens of new energy signatures identical to the Terran warships flared into existence on the hegemony's sensors. The Ghost Echoes, sophisticated decoys broadcasting false heat and energy readings, accelerated forward, mimicking the vector of an all-out assault. The tactical display on the Cathar bridge, broadcast for all to see, flickered in confusion. The neat, orderly blockade icons were now swamped by a swarm of hostile contacts. The Cathar reaction was immediate, if predictable. Several of their forward cruisers broke formation, their weapon ports glowing as they prepared to engage the Phantom fleet. They were hunters, and their instinct was to meet a charge with overwhelming fire. But it was a wasted effort, a diversion of resources and attention at a critical moment. The deck vibrated with a low thrum as the first wave of deployment drones shot from the Resolute's belly. First wing of drones away, Lee reported, his voice now tight with focus. They're seeding the lattice arrays in grid formation, just as you ordered, Admiral. Rostova watched the main screen, her gaze sweeping over the tactical plot. The Cathar were distracted, their perfect formation now slightly frayed at the edges. They believe strength is the only tool that matters. We will show them the power of precision. A single, perfectly placed lever can move a world. The drones, small and swift, weaved through the void, deploying hexagonal plates of gleaming material. These were the mirrors, the core of the fleet's unique doctrine. In moments, a vast semi-transparent field began to form, a shimmering honeycomb of light-catching surfaces positioned carefully between the Stellaron and the Cathar fleet. It wasn't a wall. It was a lens, vast and intricate. The glare from the local star caught on its surface, making it glitter like a spiderweb spun from diamonds. Solon, has the tally bias projection stabilized? Rostova asked, her voice calm amidst the controlled tension. Affirmative, Admiral, the AI replied. Overlord Valerius is expending 17% more energy than tactically necessary to maintain his blockade's weapon charge. It is a posture of excessive force meant to intimidate. The projection is locked. Excellent, Rostova murmured. He's overconfident. Feed those numbers to Anya's team. I want every mirror in that lattice angled to the nanometer. We're going to collect his wasted energy and give it back to him. This is how we return fire without ever firing a shot. On the Cathar dreadnought, Overlord Valerius snarled as his tactical officer reported the phantom contacts were fading. Deception, a coward's trick. He slammed a gauntleted fist on his command throne. The human fleet had not moved an inch. But now there was this glittering field. It was clearly defensive. He would show them how little their static defenses mattered. Target the lead arrays protecting the civilian ship, Valerius commanded, his voice booming through his own bridge. Show them their fragile glass will shatter before the hegemony's might. Fire a cleansing volley. The main cannons of 3 Cathar cruisers charged their barrels, glowing with malevolent power. On the Resolute, the change was noted instantly. Energy spike, Sharma called out. They're ignoring the decoys. Multiple weapon locks on the forward lattice sectors Alpha through Gamma. They are taking the bait. Lee said, a note of awe in his voice. It's not bait, Commander Rostova corrected. It's a classroom, and class is now in session. Hold the line until the bell rings. The Cathar volley was a torrent of pure energy. 3 incandescent beams of destruction converging on the mirror lattice. From the civilian ships, it looked like the end. A gasp went through the crew of a small medical freighter, its captain shielding her eyes from the sudden blinding flash. For a moment, she believed the human fleet had failed another victim of the hegemony's brutal calculus. She gripped the worn fabric of her command chair, the ship's hull vibrating from the sheer energy passing nearby. Her chief medical officer was already staging triage kits, a grim but necessary preparation for the inevitable. But the beams did not shatter the lattice. Instead, they struck the precisely angled mirrors and were caught. The energy impossibly did not dissipate or explode. It was funneled down a corridor of shimmering hexagonal surfaces, each mirror adjusting in real time to contain the raging torrent. The light bent, flowing like water down a chute stripped of its destructive purpose and transformed into a controlled stream. The entire lattice glowed, a vast circuit board redirecting a river of fire. The sight was breathtaking, a feat of engineering that bordered on art. For a few seconds, the Cathar's own power was held in stasis, trapped within the human construct. The console glare on the Resolute's bridge was so intense that autofilters had to engage, casting the crew in stark shadows. Lattice integrity is at 98%, Solon stated, its voice unwavering. Energy containment is stable. We are ready to redirect on your command, Admiral. Rostova watched the trapped energy, the raw power of her enemy held harmlessly in her grasp. Commander Lee, signal the Stellaron. Tell them their escape corridor is about to open. Full burn on my mark. Aye. Admiral Lee replied, his earlier frustration replaced by a fierce, focused energy. Rostova took a breath. Solon opened the release valve. Destination point 0. Let's show them the consequences of their own expenditure. We will show them the shape of their own anger. At her command, the final mirrors in the chain re-angled. The captured energy, a blinding spear of white-hot plasma, was not fired back at the Cathar fleet. It was vented perfectly focused into an empty patch of space equidistant between the two fleets. The silent void erupted in a brilliant star-like flash of light and heat, a miniature sun that blazed for a full 5 seconds before fading. The display was harmless, but the message was not. It was a receipt. It said, "This is the power you just used. We caught it. We controlled it. We can aim it wherever we wish." A stunned silence fell over the Cathar bridge. Their own volley, intended to crush and terrify, had been turned into a fireworks display. Overlord Valerius stared at the fading after-image on his view screen, his knuckles turning white. He had not been attacked. He had been disarmed and dismissed in a single elegant motion. "The Stellaron is away," Sharma called out, her voice jubilant. "They're on full burn, accelerating out of the blockade zone. The corridor is holding." On the main screen, the civilian transport was a silver needle streaking into the safety of deep space, its path illuminated by the residual glow of the energy discharge. The first part of Rostova's plan had worked flawlessly. The hegemony had been shown that their power could be turned against them. But Rostova knew this was far from over. A humiliated predator was the most dangerous kind. The first lesson is always the gentlest. The cost of the maneuver was not zero. The intense energy transfer had pushed the forward arrays to their absolute limit. "Admiral, we have a report from Array Gamma 7 Lee," stated, his tone sobering. "The primary emitters are slagged. The array is offline. Support frigate Endurance reports 4 crew with minor heat flash burns from the backlash. They were too close to the alignment conduit." Rostova nodded, her expression grim. Every action had a price, and the ledger always had to be settled. The hum of the ship's life support seemed louder now, a reminder of the fragile lives she was sworn to protect. This victory was temporary. The Stellaron was safe, but the rest of the convoy and the entire planet of Haven were still under the gun. And now the Cathar were angry. Their formation, once rigid and arrogant, was now shifting. It was a subtle change, but to Rostova's experienced eye, it was deeply unsettling. The ships were not retreating or re-engaging. They were flowing into a new configuration, a tightening web. It was during this tense quiet that Rostova allowed herself a moment, turning to the ever-present intelligence of her fleet mind. "Solon, tell me about the others. The species who faced this doctrine before us." "The archives are clear." Admiral Solon's voice replied, soft but precise. "The Tazar Confederacy attempted a fleet engagement and were annihilated in 3 cycles. The Silicate Swarm used static defenses and were starved into submission. The Cathar doctrine has never been broken." Rostova's gaze drifted to the star charts, to the small defiant light of Haven. "They fought with swords. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. A promise made to the fallen is a debt owed to the future." "Admiral, I'm seeing something strange." Commander Lee interrupted, his voice laced with confusion. He pointed to the tactical display. "The Cathar. They're forming an annihilation pocket, a classic kill box formation. But they're firing vectors. They're converging inward. On their own flagship." Rostova's eyes narrowed. That made no sense. It was a self-defeating posture. "Solon, are you still monitoring the Overlord's transmissions?" "Affirmative. He has opened a high-priority channel, but not to us. He is communicating directly with the Hegemony High Command. He is broadcasting his tactical display live, just as he did before." The AI paused for a fraction of a second. "Admiral, I am running a new projection. The Overlord's doctrine is absolute. Failure to secure compliance is met with summary execution. By allowing the Stellaron to escape, he has failed." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Valerius wasn't positioning his fleet for an attack on the humans. He was staging another performance for his masters and for the entire sector. He was cornered. "He's not creating a kill box," Rostova whispered, the blood draining from her face. "He's building a funeral pyre. The desperate man burns the world to rule the ashes." Before anyone could process the implication, a new ultimatum klaxon blared across all channels. The crimson timer reappeared on the main screen, but it was reset. Not to 6 hours, but to a terrifying 90 minutes. Overlord Valerius's voice returned, no longer booming with arrogance, but now strained, venomous, and utterly committed. "The human fleet has interfered for the last time," the voice snarled. "The price for this defiance will be paid not by a single ship, but by the world they sought to protect. The hegemony's justice is absolute." The tactical display updated. New vectors appeared, originating not just from the dreadnought, but from every Cathar ship in the blockade. And they were all aimed at Haven. A web of terrifying energy signatures began to build a system-scale weapon, charging up, designed to scar a planet's surface. Valerius was going to burn the world to salvage his own honor. Rostova stared at the impossible strategic problem before her. She had won the first exchange with elegance and restraint, saving thousands of lives without taking a single one. But in doing so, she had pushed her enemy beyond reason. She had offered a lesson in mercy, and he had responded by threatening genocide. The deck of the Resolute was still the only sound, the faint, insistent hiss of the ventilation system. He is creating a scenario where his only acceptable loss is the one he inflicts upon Haven Solon's Tectacid, its calm tone, a chilling counterpoint to the horror unfolding on the screen. His doctrine does not allow for retreat. To fail is to be erased by his own superiors. This is his only remaining move. Rostova's expression, for so long a mask of calm calculation, hardened into something new. The time for gentle lessons was over. The time for pity had passed. She turned to Lee, her voice as cold and hard as the void outside. "Then we will teach him the meaning of a final accounting. Sometimes to save a people, you must become a reckoning." The bridge of the Resolute shifted from a classroom to a crucible. The low hum of the core deepened, a predator clearing its throat. Every screen, every console reflected the new reality. The stakes had escalated from a convoy to a world, from a test of wills to a vow of annihilation. Rostova had sought to show the Cathar a better way to reflect their own violence back at them as a warning. Now that reflection had to become a weapon. "Solon, I want you to partition 70% of your processing power," Rostova commanded, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "Run every possible outcome of a full fleet engagement, but with a new primary objective. Not the destruction of the Cathar fleet, but its complete and total disarmament. I want them toothless and adrift. That objective carries a significantly higher risk profile, Admiral," the AI noted. "It requires exposing our ships to closer ranges and more precise, non-lethal strikes." "I'm aware," Rostova clipped back. "What is the status of the precedent cascade calculation you were running in the background?" A beat of silence. "It is 92% complete, Admiral. It models the socio-political fallout within the Galactic Concord if the hegemony's ultimatum doctrine is publicly and decisively broken without resorting to their methods." "Then it's time to finish it," Rostova declared. "Gian, retask the lattice drones. I want them to form not a shield, but a channel. A corridor wide and inviting, leading from the Cathar fleet's current position directly away from Haven and into empty space. Make it look like the safest retreat vector they could possibly imagine. The easiest way out is always the trap." Commander Lee's eyes widened as he grasped the sheer audacity of the plan. "Admiral, you're inviting them to run. I am offering them a choice," Rostova countered, her gaze locked on the tactical map. "One last chance to step back from the abyss, but I do not expect them to take it. Anya, begin broadcasting on a secure fleet channel. Use our tightest encryption. I have a message for every captain in this fleet." On the small convoy ships still huddled in Haven's shadow, the mood was somber. Inside the medical freighter, the chief medic, who had been preparing for casualties, now found herself trying to comfort a young pilot whose family lived in the capital city of Haven, directly in the path of the Cathar's new targeting array. There were no words for this kind of terror. All she could offer was a steady hand on his shoulder and the quiet promise that they were not alone. The presence of the human fleet was their only shield against the coming storm. Rostova's voice, clear and unwavering, filled the bridges of the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet. "Attention all hands. This is the Admiral. The Cathar hegemony has made its final move. They have targeted civilians not as hostages, but for extermination. We came here to teach. We will end this by setting a precedent." The hum of every ship's engines seemed to answer her. "Our rules of engagement have been clear. We do not strike first. We do not punish without reason. But we are, as of this moment, the only thing standing between a sentient world and oblivion. Therefore, our primary directive is now the complete neutralization of the Cathar threat. A mirror can reflect a warning, or it can focus the sun. We will turn their kill box inside out." She continued, her voice resonating with a conviction that left no room for doubt. "We will use their own formation, their own doctrine of absolute commitment against them. They expect us to cower. They expect us to break. We will instead provide the fulcrum upon which their entire philosophy shatters." The Cathar fleet continued to pour energy into its planet-killer array. The space around their ships began to warp and shimmer with the sheer concentration of power. The countdown ticked relentlessly downward. 1542. The human fleet, in stark contrast, remained quiet, its ships holding their positions, its mirror arrays reconfiguring into that long, open corridor. To Overlord Valerius, it looked like the humans were preparing a path for their own retreat. Arrogance, even in the face of death, was a powerful blinder. Solon Rostova said, her voice now quiet, almost conversational. "Bring up the ledger. It's time to make an entry." "Ready, Admiral. Let it show that the 3rd Fleet offered peace. Let it show that we offered mercy." She paused, watching as the final mirror slid into place. "And let it show that when faced with a choice between our own safety and the lives of innocents, we chose to be the shield. Now brace for impact. Brace for the reckoning." The plan was a gamble of breathtaking scale. Rostova was counting on the Cathar's doctrinal rigidity, on Valerius's desperate need to perform his own destruction in a blaze of defiant violence. The open corridor formed by the mirror lattice was not just an invitation to retreat. It was a psychological lure. It was a perfectly aligned channel so tempting that ignoring it would seem like a tactical blunder to the hegemony high command watching the broadcast. Valerius would have to prove he was not a coward, that he would not take the easy way out. He would hold his ground. "He's not moving." Admiral Commander Lee confirmed, his voice tense. "He's holding formation. The planetary bombardment array is at 80% charge. He is as predictable as a falling stone," Rostova murmured. The faint scent of ozone began to fill the bridge, a byproduct of the energy being routed through the Resolute's own systems. "Anya, are the secondary drones in position?" "Yes," Admiral Sharma replied. "They're running cold, tucked into the debris field from that asteroid we surveyed on entry. Completely invisible to Cathar sensors." This was the seed of another mystery, one she had planted days ago, now about to bear fruit. The asteroid field had not been a navigational hazard. It was a staging ground. The void always holds a hidden knife. "Solon, I want you to begin a narrow-beam transmission aimed directly at the Cathar flagship. Use their own encryption protocols against them. I want to talk to Valerius." "He will not respond, Admiral. His doctrine forbids communication with an enemy during the final execution of an ultimatum." "He won't have to respond," Rostova said. "I just need him to listen." The message was sent. It was simple, containing only a live feed from the Resolute's tactical display. But on that display, a new simulation was running the precedent cascade. It showed in stark, undeniable graphics the political ramifications in the Galactic Concord. It showed the hegemony being censured, their trade privileges revoked, their ultimatum doctrine formally classified as a crime against sapience. It was a vision of his future and the future of his people, isolation and disgrace. On the Cathar dreadnought, the message appeared on a secondary screen on Valerius's command throne. He saw it, his mandibles tightening in fury. It was another human trick, psychological warfare. He would not be swayed. He raised a hand to give the final command to unleash hell upon the world below. Now Rostova ordered, "The trap is sprung not with a sound, but with a shift in the light." The secondary drones hidden in the asteroid debris activated. They were not decoys. Each one was a specialized mirror array, smaller but far more advanced than the ones in the main lattice. In perfect synchronization, they deployed, forming a second invisible lattice behind the Cathar fleet. The open corridor that seemed to offer retreat was now the mouth of a cannon. The fleet was now positioned between two massive concentric fields of mirrors. "What is this?" Valerius snarled as his sensor officer screamed about new energy readings from their rear. "Commander Lee, redirect main power from our weapons to the lattice emitters," Rostova commanded. "Solon, execute the final calculation. We are going to turn this entire sector of space into a resonance chamber." The Resolute and the entire human fleet did not fire a single weapon. Instead, they poured their energy into the first mirror lattice. A beam of pure, refined power, not destructive plasma, shot down the corridor. It struck the second lattice behind the Cathar fleet and was instantly reflected back. The beam hit the first lattice again and was reflected back once more. An energy loop was created, a standing wave of unimaginable power that oscillated back and forth between the two mirror fields faster than light, with the Cathar fleet trapped directly in the middle. The space within the corridor became a cage of pure energy. It didn't burn or explode. It resonated. Every atom in their hulls began to scream. The effect on the Cathar ships was instantaneous and devastating. The resonance wave tuned to the specific frequency of their hull plating, and power conduits induced a catastrophic harmonic overload. Ship systems failed in a cascading wave. Weapon ports fused shut. Engines sputtered and died. On the Cathar bridge, consoles exploded in showers of sparks, not from being hit, but from their own internal power sources turning against them. Overlord Valerius was thrown from his throne as his dreadnought seized every light on his bridge, flickering out, replaced by the terrifying red of emergency alerts, and then nothing. His planetary bombardment, charged to 99%, dissipated harmlessly as its containment field collapsed. His entire fleet, so menacing moments before, was now dead in the water, silent, powerless, and adrift. The cost to the human fleet was a staggering expenditure of energy, pushing their cores to the brink of overload. Coolant hissed through the walls of the Resolute like a great, weary sigh. The countdown timer vanished from the main screen. The threat was over. Rostova had not destroyed a single ship. She had not killed a single member of their crew. She had simply taken their power away, turning their own rigid formation into the instrument of their defeat. She had held up a mirror and forced them to see themselves as they truly were, nothing without their weapons. Solon Rostova said, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Broadcast on all channels system-wide. Unencrypted. Broadcasting Admiral." She looked directly into the main viewport, at the now helpless ships of her enemy, and at the beautiful, unharmed world of Haven beyond. "This is Admiral Eva Rostova of the Terran Fleet. The hegemony's ultimatum is over. Their fleet has been neutralized. There will be no bombardment. There will be no surrender. She let the silence carry the weight of her next words. We have recorded these events. The unprovoked threat, the targeting of civilians, and our response. This recording, this ledger, will be submitted to the Galactic Concord as evidence. The Cathar ultimatum doctrine is hereby declared illegitimate. Any civilization that employs it will face the same consequences. A cheer erupted on the bridge of the Resolute, a wave of relief and triumph that broke the spell of perfect discipline. Commander Lee was laughing, clapping Lieutenant Sharma on the back. Even Solin's synthesized voice seemed to carry a note of satisfaction. Precedent cascade simulation is now 100% confirmed, Admiral. The model holds. The political impact will be substantial. Rostova allowed herself a small, weary smile. She had held the line. She had protected the innocent. But more than that, she had changed the rules of the game. She had faced an enemy built on fear and broken them with mathematics and mercy. The console in front of her displayed the final tally of the engagement: 0 enemy casualties, 0 friendly losses. 17,000 souls on the Stellaron saved. A world of millions preserved. The lights of Haven's cities began to shine more brightly, their power grid no longer diverted for planetary shields. From the medical freighter, the young pilot looked down at his home, tears streaming down his face, and saw the future he thought had been stolen from him. On the public channels, the sound was not of prayer or panic, but of celebration. It was a sound Rostova knew she would never forget. The mirror arrays, their duty done, began to cool from their incandescent fury to a dull pewter gray. She had stared into the face of a doctrine that said might makes right, and she had proven it wrong. She had shown the galaxy that a different way was possible. It was a victory not of arms, but of principle. A victory that would be remembered not for the explosions, but for the profound and resonant silence that followed. The true lesson was not for the Cathar alone, but for everyone watching. Power is not the weapon you wield, but the choice you make when you hold it. Restraint is not weakness, and mercy is the sharpest blade of all when it is backed by the conviction to use it. The ledger was now balanced, not with blood, but with a new, unshakable truth entered for all to see. The universe does not fear monsters. It fears the light that exposes them. The transmission ended, but the silence it left behind was louder than any explosion. On the bridge of the Resolute, the crew exchanged looks of dazed disbelief, the tension of the last hour collapsing into a wave of pure, unadulterated relief. From her station, Anya Sharma swiveled in her chair, a wide grin splitting her face. "Admiral, they're singing down there. On Haven. I'm patching it into the local comms." A faint, multi-voiced melody, a planetary anthem of hope reborn, trickled through the bridge speakers, a sound more potent than any weapon. But Rostova's gaze remained fixed on the tactical display. The Cathar ships were dark, their icons grayed out, but they were still there. An entire fleet, armed and crewed by thousands of warriors, raised on a doctrine of supremacy, was now floating helplessly in her space. This was not an ending. It was a new and dangerous beginning. The scent of victory was sweet, but beneath it, she could already detect the acrid undertone of complication. "Jian," she said, her voice cutting cleanly through the celebratory murmur. "Send out the utility drones. I want a full, non-invasive scan of their lead dreadnought. Check for life support status, internal power fluctuations, anything. They are defeated, not annihilated. We have a duty of care." "A hard truth is still a truth." Admiral Solin's voice interrupted its calm tone, pulling the bridge back to sharp attention. "I am detecting a high-energy event at the system's edge, a gravitic displacement." It is the signature of a Cathar translite entry, but the energy profile is different, larger. The tactical map updated instantly. A new icon colored a deeper, more menacing shade of crimson appeared at the far end of the Haven system. It was a single contact, but its energy signature was equivalent to half of Valerius's entire fleet. It was not accelerating. It was simply there, a silent, monstrous presence that had just appeared out of nowhere. The quiet hum of the Resolute's engines suddenly felt inadequate. Rostova's brief moment of relief evaporated. She had not defeated the hegemony. She had merely swatted the hand of a far greater beast, and now it had turned its head to look. "It's not another fleet," she said, her mind racing. "It's an answer. They're responding to Valerius's failure. They do not send messengers, they send judges." The contact is broadcasting. Admiral Sharma reported, her earlier elation gone, replaced by a tense focus. "It's a hegemony high command priority signal. It's a public execution order." On the main screen, the broadcast translated into stark, brutal text. Overlord Valerius was found guilty of doctrinal failure. His sentence was to be carried out by Executor Kael of the Fourth Fleet. The punishment for his fleet was to be total reclamation. "Reclamation," Lee repeated, his voice laced with dread. "What does that mean?" "It means they are here to erase the evidence," Rostova answered, her voice grim. "All of it. The ships, the crews, everyone who witnessed their doctrine being broken." Her eyes flickered to the icons of the disabled Cathar fleet. Valerius's crew were no longer just defeated soldiers. They were prisoners, and their own side was coming to be their executioner. The moral calculus of the situation had just become infinitely more complex. A cage is a cage even when the door is open. The new Cathar ship, the Verdict, began to move. It did not accelerate with the brute force of Valerius's dreadnought. It flowed through space, a sleek, menacing predator, its design clearly a generation ahead of the ships it had come to judge. It ignored Haven. It ignored the human fleet. Its trajectory was a direct, merciless line toward the helpless Cathar dreadnought. "Solon, what are its weapon capabilities?" Rostova demanded. "Its primary weapon is a gravimetric lance, Admiral. It does not project energy. It warps space-time in a focused cone. Our mirror lattice would be useless against it. It is designed to collapse matter on itself." The AI's report was a death sentence. The Verdict was not equipped for a battle. It was equipped for an erasure. The console lights on the bridge seemed to dim, reflecting the sudden grim reality. Rostova was now faced with an impossible choice. She could stand by and watch as the hegemony ruthlessly slaughtered its own, proving their monstrous nature to the galaxy, but sacrificing thousands of lives in the process. Or she could intervene, placing her fleet and her crew between a hammer and an anvil to save the lives of the very soldiers who had hours ago been ready to burn a world. "They are forcing our hand," Lee stated, his knuckles white on his console. "They know we won't stand by and watch a massacre. This is a trap." "Of course it's a trap," Rostova said. "But knowing you're walking into a trap doesn't change the fact that sometimes the only moral path leads through the fire." On a small civilian observation deck orbiting Haven, a young astronomer who had been charting the battle for the planetary news feeds now watched in horror. She saw the new ship, the Verdict, a black sliver of death against the starfield, and understood its purpose. She began to record, her hands trembling. Her broadcast was not one of celebration anymore, but a hushed, terrified whisper narrating the approach of a second, more terrible storm. She was bearing witness to something far darker than an ultimatum. She was watching the approach of a purge. "Admiral, the Verdict will be in range of the disabled fleet in 45 minutes. Sharma announced the number hanging in the air like a guillotine. Rostova's mind was a flurry of calculations. A kinetic engagement was still suicide. The verdict outclassed them in every meaningful way. Her only advantage was surprise, and the one thing the hegemony could never seem to understand: the human capacity for radical, unpredictable action. Anya retasked the lattice drones. Pull them back into a defensive shell around our fleet, but keep them loose. I want them mobile. Rostova began to pace the command deck, her steps measured each one, a thought process made manifest. Jian, prepare the assault shuttles. Load them with engineering crews and emergency breaching charges. Solon, I need you to find a way to bypass the command lockouts on Valerius's ships. We need to give them back their engines. The bridge crew stared at her. The plan was insane. Admiral Lee said carefully, "You want to rearm them?" "No." Rostova corrected, her eyes flashing with a cold fire. "I want to give them the ability to run. I am going to offer Valerius a choice he never had under his own doctrine: the chance to live. We will answer their judgment with an offer of grace." The order sent a ripple of activity through the Third Fleet. Engineering crews scrambled, donning heavy-duty worksuits. The low thrum of shuttle engines warming up vibrated through the decks. It was a race against time, a desperate, audacious gamble to turn defeated enemies into unwilling temporary allies in the cause of their own survival. The scent of ozone from the earlier maneuver was now replaced by the smell of hot metal and engine coolant, the aroma of a fleet preparing for a very different kind of fight. "Executor Kyle is hailing us." Sharma reported, her voice tight. On screen, Rostova commanded, stopping her pacing, to stand before the main viewport. The face that appeared was not like Valerius's. Where the Overlord had been brutish and theatrical, the Executor was gaunt, his features sharp and intelligent, his eyes holding a chilling stillness. There was no rage in his expression, only a profound, unshakable certainty. Admiral Rostova Kyle's voice was a low, synthesized rasp. "You have interfered with a matter of hegemony, internal discipline. This is your only warning. Withdraw your fleet beyond the system's heliopause, or you will be classified as doctrinal contaminants, and we cleanse all contamination." The ultimatum was different, colder, and in many ways more terrifying. He wasn't threatening a planet. He was threatening to erase them from existence with the casual indifference of a janitor mopping a floor. Executor Rostova replied, her own voice a perfect match for his cold calm. "Your internal discipline is about to become a public atrocity. I will not stand aside and allow you to murder thousands of helpless soldiers." A faint, humorless smile touched Kyle's thin lips. "They are not soldiers. They are failures. The hegemony does not tolerate failure. Their lives were forfeit the moment your transport escaped. Their doctrine was a grinding gear, and everyone was fodder. That is the difference between us," Executor Rostova said. "We believe even in failure there is a chance for redemption. You will not fire on those ships." Kyle's smile faded. "You are not in a position to make demands, Admiral. You won the first exchange with a clever trick. Do not mistake a single victory for a change in the fundamental balance of power. You have 30 minutes. The screen went blank. The clock was ticking again. Rostova's eyes met Lee's across the bridge. The unspoken question hung between them: could they do it? Could they reach the Cathar ships, breach their hulls, bypass their systems, and give them back control before the verdict arrived to wipe them all from the sky? "Olan, what is the probability of success?" Lee asked the question aloud. Based on current projections, the AI replied, "The probability of our engineering crews successfully restoring propulsion to even a third of the disabled fleet before the verdict engages is 12.4%. A wave of cold dread washed over the bridge. The odds were impossible. Then we will have to change the equation, Rostova said, her jaw set. Anya, I want you to find the weakest point in the verdict's forward shield array. Jian, single out our fastest ship, the corvette Swift Arrow. I want its crew ready for a high-velocity burn. We can't stop the verdict, but we might be able to make it flinch. A single stone can turn a river. The new plan was even more desperate. A single small ship against a vessel that could unmake matter. But Rostova knew that Kyle, for all his cold logic, was still a creature of the hegemony. He was an enforcer, and enforcers were focused on their target. Distractions were not something they handled well, especially distractions that appeared to be suicidal. The assault shuttles launched burning hard for the disabled Cathar fleet. They were flying into the shadow of their own enemy, their mission to save them from an even greater one. On the bridge of Valerius's crippled dreadnought, the former overlord sat in the dark, his command throne cold and lifeless. He was watching the approach of the verdict on a single battery-powered emergency monitor. He knew what it was. It was his end delivered by the cold, efficient hand of his own masters. He felt nothing. Not fear, not anger, only the vast, hollow emptiness of his failure. Then his proximity alerts flared. Tiny human ships, impossibly fast, were approaching his hull. He watched them confused. Were they coming to finish the job, to board his ship and take him prisoner? It did not make sense. His confusion deepened when he saw them attach themselves to the hull near the primary engine conduits. He heard the faint percussive sound of a breaching charge. They were not attacking. They were helping. You cannot comprehend mercy when your entire life has been a fist. Admiral? The first teams are reporting successful breaches, Lee announced, his voice a mix of awe and anxiety. They're inside. They're working on the engine lockouts now. The verdict continued its inexorable approach, ignoring the tiny shuttles as if they were gnats. Kale's focus was absolute. He was here to carry out a sentence. The human fleet was a secondary concern, a problem to be dealt with after the primary task was complete. His tactical display showed the human ships holding their defensive posture, seemingly unwilling to engage. He saw their corvette, the Swift Arrow, peeling away from the main formation, but its energy signature was low. It was not a threat. The Swift Arrow is in position, Admiral Sharma confirmed. Tell them to wait for my signal. Rostova said, her eyes glued to the tactical plot, watching the three variables converge: the shuttles, the verdict, and the corvette. It was a cosmic ballet of desperation and hope, and she was the choreographer. The ship's internal chronometer seemed to tick louder each second, a hammer blow. The faint vibration of the deck plates under her feet was a constant reminder of the power held in check, waiting for her command. First engine is back online. Lee shouted, a surge of triumph in his voice. The Cathar cruiser Iron Fang has propulsion. They're moving. On the main screen, one of the grayed-out icons flickered to life. The cruiser, sluggishly at first, began to pull away from the rest of the disabled fleet. On its bridge, a stunned Cathar captain stared at his newly functional console, then at the human shuttle detaching from his hull. He had been given a choice. He could stay and die, or he could run. He chose to run. A single spark can ignite a prairie fire. More icons began to light up as the human engineering teams worked with frantic speed. A destroyer, 2 frigates, another cruiser. A small, ragged flotilla of the damned was being born, a fleet of fugitives running from their own side, enabled by their enemies. The perfect, orderly purge Kyle had envisioned was turning into a chaotic, messy escape. Executor Kale watched the scattering ships, his expression tightening with annoyance. This was an untidy complication. He could still destroy them, but it would be inefficient. It would require him to break formation and hunt them down individually. The humans were not fighting him. They were simply making his job more difficult, more unprofessional. "Target the lead ship," the dreadnought Kale commanded his weapons officer. "We will make an example of the head, and the body will cease to twitch." The verdict's forward emitters began to glow, a subtle distortion of space-time gathering at its prow. The gravimetric lance was charging. Now Rostova snapped. "Signal the swift arrow full burn. They will learn that even the smallest voice can echo in the dark." The corvette, which had been drifting with minimal power, suddenly ignited its engines. It did not fly at the verdict. It shot away at a perpendicular angle, a silver streak against the black. But as it burned, it deployed a single specialized drone. The drone was a modified mirror, but it wasn't designed to reflect energy. It was a gravimetric resonator. The verdict fired. A cone of invisible force, a ripple in the fabric of reality, shot toward Valerius's dreadnought. But just as it was fired, the Swift Arrow's drone activated. It pulsed once, a high-frequency gravitic wave that was not a weapon, but a signal. The pulse was too weak to do any damage, but it was just strong enough to slightly, almost imperceptibly, alter the path of the lance. The beam meant for the dreadnought's heart instead struck its massive unpowered port engine nacelle. The result was not a clean collapse of matter. The off-center strike on a non-critical and unenergized part of the ship created a catastrophic but survivable explosion. The entire nacelle was torn from the dreadnought's body, sent tumbling into space in a cloud of shrapnel. The dreadnought itself was sent into a violent, uncontrolled spin, but its core remained intact. Its life support held. Valerius was alive, thrown from his chair by the impact, but alive. The cost was the Swift Arrow. The gravimetric backlash from the lance, even at that distance, overwhelmed the small ship. Its systems fried, its engine containment failed. The corvette became a brief, silent star, a sacrifice made not to kill, but to save. Rostova watched its icon wink out on her screen, her heart a cold stone in her chest. 200 souls gone in an instant. The first true cost of her conviction had been paid. A low coolant hiss from a nearby conduit sounded like a mournful sigh. Kyle was furious. The humans' maneuver was an act of pure, insane defiance. They had sacrificed one of their own ships just to nudge his aim. They hadn't saved the dreadnought, merely prolonged its death and ruined the pristine efficiency of his execution. But in that moment of anger, he made a mistake. He turned his attention. He redirected his ship, angling to finish off the spinning dreadnought, his focus entirely on the original target. He had dismissed the rest of the human fleet as a passive defensive threat. He did not see the trap that was closing around him until it was too late. All ships, Rostova's voice was low, laced with the ice of controlled fury. Execute the ledger maneuver, on my mark. The human fleet, which had been holding its defensive posture, moved. The mirror lattice, which had seemed to be a protective shell, reconfigured with blinding speed. It did not form a wall or a channel. It formed a net. The mobile arrays swarmed around the verdict, creating a cage of shimmering hexagonal light. Kyle saw it and scoffed. Their mirrors again. Have they learned nothing? Fire the lance. Tear through them. He's falling for it, Admiral Lee said, his voice grimly satisfied. They always do, Rostova replied. They cannot comprehend a tool being used for more than one purpose. A mirror can be a shield, a lens, or the bars of a cage. The human ships did not fire. Instead, they activated their own gravitic drives, but routed the energy outward through the mirror lattice. Each mirror became a low-power gravitic emitter, all of them focused inward on the verdict. A single ship's gravitic field was insignificant. but the combined focused field of an entire fleet, amplified and shaped by the lattice, was not. It was the resonance cage again, but this time it was not tuned to energy systems. It was tuned to space-time itself. The verdict was suddenly trapped in a bubble of distorted gravity. It was not being damaged, but it was being held. The immense power of its own engines fighting against the localized gravity well began to strain the ship's structural integrity. Alarms shrieked across Kyle's bridge. "What is this?" he roared. "Break us through! We cannot executor his helm!" Officer screamed. "The more power we apply, the greater the structural strain." "We are tearing ourselves apart." Kale stared at the human fleet on his screen. They were not attacking. They were simply holding him. They had taken his single greatest weapon, the manipulation of gravity, and turned it back on him, not as a weapon of destruction, but as a tool of containment. They had built him a prison out of his own strength. Hold the line. Hold it until the universe breaks around you. Inside the spinning wreck of the Cathar dreadnought, Overlord Valerius pulled himself up and his body bruised, his mind reeling. He saw the human fleets maneuver on a cracked monitor. He saw the invincible verdict, the instrument of his judgment, trapped and helpless. He saw the last of his own fleet, the ships the humans had freed, burning their engines to escape into the void, their captains choosing life over doctrine. In that moment, something inside him shattered. The rigid certainty of the hegemony. The absolute conviction that had guided his entire life crumbled into dust. He had been saved by the people he had sworn to enslave. He had been shown mercy by an enemy who had every right to destroy him. And he had just watched his own side sacrifice nothing to save him, while the humans had sacrificed a ship full of their own people. The lesson was complete. It was a lesson written not in light, but in sacrifice. A lesson he could not ignore. With a shaking hand, Valerius activated his ship's emergency broadcast system. His voice, weak and broken, went out across the system, to the fleeing Cathar ships, to the human fleet, and to the hegemony command channel that he knew was still listening. "This is Overlord Valerius," he began, his voice rasping. "The sentence of Executor Kale is illegitimate. The human doctrine is superior." He collapsed over the console, the effort too much. A single confession can topple an empire. The effect was instantaneous. On the Concorde's public ledgers, which had been monitoring the situation, Valerius's statement was registered. An official hegemony overlord had just denounced his own side's core philosophy and declared the humans morally superior on an open channel in the middle of a battle. The political fallout would be catastrophic for the Cathar. The precedent. Cascade. Solon had calculated was now a raging, unstoppable flood. On the bridge of the verdict, Kale watched his mission, his career, and his entire worldview dissolve. His orders were to silence a failure. But that failure had just spoken, and his words had shaken the foundations of the hegemony. The human admiral had not just defeated him militarily. She had defeated him ideologically, using his own target as the weapon. Rostova watched the disabled dreadnought, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. The cost had been high, but the payoff was a victory that would echo for centuries. She had not only saved Haven, she had broken the hegemony's will to fight not with force, but with the one thing their doctrine had no defense against: a conscience. "Solon," she said, her voice soft but clear, "release him." The gravitic cage dissolved. The verdict was free, but Executor Kyle did not fire. He did not move. He simply floated there, adrift in the silence, his authority gone, his purpose shattered. After a long, tense minute, his ship turned. It did not flee. It simply moved slowly back toward the system's edge, a defeated god slinking back into the darkness. He had come as a judge, and he was leaving as a witness to a power he could not comprehend. The Galactic Concord's official ruling was posted less than an hour later, broadcast on all public channels. The Cathar hegemony's ultimatum doctrine was formally outlawed, and their seat on the council was suspended, pending a full inquiry. The precedent was locked. Rostova stood on her bridge, the adrenaline finally leaving her, replaced by a profound weariness. The lights on Haven below seemed to shine with a defiant, unbreakable brilliance. She looked at the empty space where the swift arrow had been a silent tribute to their sacrifice. The tally was complete. The account was settled. The public ledger on the main view screen confirmed the Concord's decision, its text glowing a resolute gold against the star-dusted black. "We came here to teach a lesson about the cost of ultimatums," Rostova said, her voice barely a whisper, meant only for herself and the quiet hum of the bridge. "But the universe taught us one, too. That the cost of mercy can be just as high as the cost of war, and that you must be willing to pay it. You hold the line not because it is easy, but because the moment you let it go, you become the thing you are fighting. The ledger is balanced not by the sword, but by the steady hand that refuses to wield it."